In this video I'm going to go through a human translation output of translation of a press statement from German to English, and I'm going to compare it with a machine translation by DeepL. So here you can see that the machine translation output, this is the headline: "This verdict is a slap in the face for the survivors of NSU terrorism and the victims' families." And I chose a much shorter phrase, so I said the survivors and the victims' families, right? And the machine translation stuck to the more literal version because the machine translation is not capable of finding a shorter alternative. It can do a statistic comparison, what is the most commonly used phrase, but it's not going to go look for the shortest expression in the target language. So this is still a major weakness. So here you have this judgment as a slap in the face for the relatives of those murdered by the NSU instead of the NSU, instead of the victims, right? Instead of the victims. They say those murdered by, because this is the literal translation of die Ermordeten, because this is in German. There you can turn a verb into a noun in this way. You say for example, you often have it, der Ermordete, it means the person who was murdered in English, literally. But of course you're not gonna use the long expression in English all the time. You're gonna use a short alternative, such as the victim, in normal speech, right? So if you're gonna go and translate this nominalized verb, the murdered one, you're going to have to find a natural sounding alternative, and this is something that machine translation is not capable of. It will say those murdered by. But I have to say this is also something that a lot of human translators will not get right. So it takes a little practice, and you really have to think in the target language. So here we have the first sentence. Das antifaschistische Bündnis NSU-Watch übt massive Kritik an den Entscheidungen des Senats im ersten NSU-Prozess. So the human translation is greatly critical of the Senate's decision in the first trial against the Socialists underground. So instead of saying here the machine translation uses the verb, the active verb. It says it strongly criticizes, because this is what the source text is saying. It says it's using a phrasal expression, so you cannot even directly translate this into English. Must Kritik üben. This is like a noun, a verbal pair that just goes together. The machine translation is saying it strongly criticizes the decision. Here also one thing that machine translation or amateur human translation is not going to get right is using the possessive to form to make expressions shorter, right? So in the machine translation it says the decisions of the Senate. It's using this prepositional phrase instead of saying the Senate's decision, which is the shorter alternative. And a lot of time, if you want to see if it's your translation into English has been done by somebody who kind of knows their work, they will know how to use the possessive s to keep their writing shorter. Then again, here we have this judgment is a slap in the face, right? So machine got it right, I got it right. It's a slap in the face. It's ein Schlag ins Gesicht. So that's an idiom that just translates directly, right? It's a great offense. It's very offensive. Now, instead of judgment, which is a longer word, I'm using verdict. You could argue that verdict is a more foreign word. It's more it sounds more legal than judgment, which might be more something that people would use in non-technical speech, right? As a slap in the face for the survivors of NSU terrorism and the victims' families. So here again we have the same expression, and see, this is why it's important to have a to have a short version of this for this whole phrase, right? The survivors and the victims' families, because it's coming up again and again and again throughout the text, and you cannot write every time the relatives of those murdered by the NSU and the survivors of NSU terror, right? Here, look at this. This is a two-liner almost, and this is just a little more than one line. So it keeps your text a lot shorter, and it doesn't add any meaning. You know, this long winding phrase. Then we have the low sentence, which is a literal translation. The geringe Strafmaß. So this is a kind of a technical expression, right? It's instead of saying eine geringe Strafe, they call it a Strafmaß, because this is what they would say in legal German. But of course, you could just say it's a short sentence, or it's a light punishment. But it's a low sentence. It's just plain wrong. The short sentences passed by Chief Justice Götzl against the defendants, Emmingewollig and Gerlach, were far below the demands of the federal prosecution. And see, here it's again, it's using a very long phrase, and it doesn't really know what it's saying. Remained considerably behind the sentences, where in English you could just, normal English you could say, we're far below the demands of the federal prosecutor's office. Here again they're using because in German they're going to say es ist von der Bundesanwaltschaft. That's the name of the agency, the federal prosecutor's office. But in English you would say like the federal prosecutor or the federal prosecution, which is a shorter version. This is the shortest way to say it, because you're not referring particularly to the office, but you're referring to the federal prosecutor as the party in the trial. And there you don't want to use the longest expression. So here we have a quote, and this has to be, I'm trying to make it sound more like spoken language. Das Urteil und seine Begründung sind eine Einladung an die terroristische Neonazi-Szene. This decision and the court opinion are an open invitation to the terrorist neo-Nazi scene. The verdict and its justification are an invitation to the terrorist neo-Nazi scene. So this is there's not a big difference here, only that the verdict and its justification, here you have kind of a dangling pronoun, right? The verdict and its justification, what do they mean? What does this mean specifically? This is a literal translation from the German, but I'm trying to make it clear that this is the court opinion, right? This is why this is what they use to justify their decision. This is like their public statement on the decision. So that it becomes more clear here. They can just pick up where the NSU left off in 2011 and have no real punishment to fear. They can continue almost unpunished where the NSU left off in 2011. So here I actually use a longer phrase because I wanted to make it sound like spoken English. You have no real punishment to fear. This is like an idiomatic expression, and if you say they can continue almost unpunished, actually you want to highlight that they are unpunished. They can do whatever they want. So that's why I put it in the end and turn it into a longer expression. Keller continues and emphasizes, so here, right, instead of ending the sentence here, I joined it with the following sentence. Keller continues and emphasizes that the lenient sentences against Wohlleben and Emminger show, because see, I wanted to have the whole quote in one sentence. It doesn't have to be one. It doesn't have to be separate sentences because one person saying the whole thing. But here they're kind of switching to a paraphrase and then going back again to a direct reported speech. The quote is downplaying the crimes of these two hardcore neo-Nazis instead of the acts of support to convinced National Socialists, right? Because the German expression is not as clear as you would say it in English, because they are literally saying there are convinced Nazis, but in English you would say that they're hardcore Nazis. This is the most this is how you would emphasize it, that they are very convinced of what they're doing, right? They are hardcore. So you have to come up with these expressions and be kind of creative. And who aided and abetted the NSU and flaunted their ideology in court, instead of offensively displayed this conviction in court, right? Because here they say this, they're literally saying they are offensively displaying their ideology, and there's a short English word for it, and whenever there is a short English word for it, use it, but of course you got to know it, and that means flaunting, right? You're trying to provoke somebody by being very obnoxious with your ideology. And because the court is downplaying the crimes. The machine translation is saying trivializing and depoliticizing, which doesn't really mean anything. It sounds very technical, very Latin, and this is how Germans would express themselves when they're saying these things, right? Bagatellisieren und entpolitisieren. But in simple English, you would downplaying is a much easier expression to use, right? As they were downplayed it as friendly favors devoid of any politics, instead of saying trivialized and depoliticized. As quasi services of friendship. Oh hell no, right? So here again you have a compound noun, Freundschaftsdienste, and the machine translation and bad human translators, they will use a direct translation, translate it, and use a preposition to kind of form a new compound, service of friendship, which is a word that doesn't not even exist in English, right? But everybody knows what a friendly favor is. Friendly favor is a real English word, right? So here they're using a word called Freundschaftsdienste, and I mean, I can't really blame the machine translation, because if you go to like any dictionary, Freundschaftsdienst, where are they gonna a friendly turn? Okay, they use an idiomatic expression, right? Freundschaftsdienst, but a lot of times you're going to get like constructed compounds which don't exist in English, such as service of friendship, and even the dictionary doesn't have friendly favor. But if you look, what's a friendly favor? Of course, that's 63,000 hits. Like that's a real expression, right? So you got to be very careful with these compounds, and instead of and don't be creative and come up with new words. First of all, you have to check the existing vocabulary of the English language. So here we have today on blah blah blah, the Senate of the Higher Regional Court of Munich. So this is like a fixed name, and I kind of Googled it, looked it up. What's the English name of the court, and the machine translation got that right, because there's not so much variety. It can't be so many things. Handed down its verdict instead of handing down, I said it passed the verdict, which is a shorter phrase. You could say handing down if you want to sound extra idiomatic, but I'm not a big fan of phrasal verbs. To hand down, to hand up, to hand whatever, especially to non-native English speakers. It's very hard to make sense of these words, while passing is, I mean, probably the same in French and Spanish and whatever, right? Probably used in a similar manner. So she was sentenced to life imprisonment. A particular, see here, Beate Zschäpe was sentenced to life imprisonment. A particular severity of guilt was established. So this is completely literal. Eine besondere Schwere der Schuld wurde festgestellt. And this, of course, doesn't mean anything. You will not understand it at all. So you have to explain it. The principal defendant, Beate Zschäpe, received a life sentence with particular gravity, right? And I think I even looked it up in the, I think I googled it, what's like besondere Schwere, what it means. It means like it's extra serious what you did, right? Which means that the sentence cannot be suspended after 15 years. Wohlleben received only 10 years for 9 counts of aiding and abetting murder. And here they say imprisonment for accessory to murder, you would have to be an accessory, right? Be an accessory to murder in 9 cases, and there are various ways to translate these terms, because aiding and abetting, English legal terminology isn't even the same between England and the US, or even between individual states in the US. So aiding and abetting could have like 50 different names in the USA, right? But you have to choose one, and then like aiding and abetting is used pretty frequently. So, but I mean, do your research, and if possible, go look at go find the translation of the German the German penal code, and see if there's a if they translate it in a particular way, this crime, and then just use that, even if it's not completely accurate, because you're never going to have a complete equivalence. Carson S. was sentenced for the same crime, but received only 3 years under juvenile law, or under juvenile criminal law. Holger Gerlach received only 3 years for supporting a terrorist organization, while under Emminger received only 2 years and 6 months for the same crime. Emminger was cleared of the charge of aiding and abetting attempted murder, right? Attempted murder during a bomb attack on a grocery store at Propsteigasse in Cologne. So this is pretty much just listing one fact after the other. What I'm trying to do, for example, what the machine translation got wrong, the Germans likes to start sentences with subordinate clauses. In dem anderen Anklagepunkt, in the other charge, which who, what the hell, which other charge, Emminger was cleared of the charge of aiding and abetting attempted murder. See, so I'm kind of putting the two together. So not the other charge, I'm specifying was cleared of the charge of aiding and abetting attempted murder. That's what they mean. So if you have a text, you have to be aware and kind of always specify what you're talking about. So the high sentence for Beate Zschäpe was to be expected. You don't have to say to be, it's not necessary. Was expected, right? Because again, they're being literal. Es war erwartbar. So literally you could say it was to be expected, but it's perfectly fine if you say if it was expected. And is a good sign. Not is to be welcomed. So here they say they're following the German grammar again. It is to be welcomed. They're using this passive construction. It is zu begrüßen. But so they just mean that all the author wants to state, we think it's a good sign. They think it's right, right? And how do you So you have to find a simple way to say that, and it's a good sign. In the opinion of the author, of course, it's clear. But by letting off her supporters, the Senate denies any existence of a larger network. And here, so I really cut that sentence short. In combination with the low penalties for the supporters, the Senate negates the existence of a larger responsible network. Oof, what the hell? I mean, you might, if you know the case, you might understand what it's about, but you have to say it. You can state it much more simply. The Senate thereby sustains the legend of an isolated trio. Thus, the court supports the fiction of the General Federal Prosecutor's office of an isolated trio. So they're kind of following this subject chain from the German. Thus, the court supports the fiction of the General Federal Prosecutor's office of an isolated trio. Long disproved by the taking of evidence in the main hearing. Blah, blah, blah. You have no idea what this is about, right? This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines long. The Senate thereby sustains. So what I'm doing is always put the subject first and then add the verb as soon as possible. The Senate thereby sustains the legend of an isolated trio, which has long been disproved in the main hearings and by the inquiry committees in the Bundestag and the federal states of Thuringia and Saxony. The court is desperately maintaining that the EU is a thing of the past, that right-wing terrorism no longer exists. So again, I'm trying to make it sound like things somebody would actually say. The results of the main hearings to inquiry committees and our own research show that the NECUC network still exists, and it was not a group of 3 loners. So you have kind of these 3 clauses right after the other, right? And not have and not mix them up, right? You go from big to small, and kind of keep the chronology intact when you're listing facts. We will persist until the families are public and we all know the identities of all the NSU supporters, and until they've been held accountable. So the style I'm using here is called parataxis. I'm using main clauses, even when I'm using commas. Every clause is a statement for itself, and then I join them with and it gives a very succinct style, and you can and then you know what each statement means. And this is also the style used in the source, but it's not always like that. But I will use parataxis, or the Greek for short sentences. I will use it even if the source text has very long sentences. I'm going to always try to chop them up. A good dozen of organized neo-Nazis, or you could say a good dozen organized neo-Nazis, watched from the benches as the court pronounced the verdict. See? Again, I'm starting with the actual subject. A good dozen organized neo-Nazis. Not, and the German is going to use may start with not actually turn the present into the subject, while the agent and the subject should be one. Agent is like the active sentient being, and who is also the subject of the sentence. So the sentence is not about the presence at all. It's about the neo-Nazis, so they should be first. Not the presence of more than a dozen organized neo-Nazis on the grandstand of the whatever. So a good dozen neo-Nazis watched from the benches as the court pronounced the verdict. And then you kind of point it out. This is a clear sign that the neo-Nazi scene still considers the NSU as part of its militant wing. Audience inside trim can also be seen as a signal from the neo-Nazi scene that the terror network of the NSU is still seen today as part of the militant neo-Nazi movement. And see here again, is still seen. It's called a crypto agent in Germany, Kryptoagents, I think, where they turn they drop the subject and turn it into a verbal phrase, is seen, and so you don't actually know who sees whom. And in this case, it's the neo-Nazis seeing it. So you shouldn't say that the presence blah 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 shows that the terror network is still seen as part of the militant neo-Nazi movement. No, the militant neo-Nazi movement sees the NSU. The neo-Nazi movement is the actual agent of the sentence, but it's dropped here in favor of a passive verbal phrase. This is a clear sign that the neo-Nazi scene still considers the NSU as part of its militant wing. See, compare this and then compare is still seen. It's totally confusing because then you have two perspectives while actually it's just one. It's just one agent seeing the object. As these and I'm not even going into like small grammar issues in the machine translation, right? Because people make fun of that, but no, that's not the actual issue with machine translation, because you can yes, you can easily correct that, and yes, you can machine post edit and come out with a readable text that's technically error-free, but technically doesn't mean that it's well written, because the source text isn't always well written, or there are grammatical structures between German and English that just don't work out if you don't know how to translate, if you don't know the right strategies to translate them into idiomatic English. As these neo-Nazis loudly applauded the weak sentence against Eminger, the judge saw no need to intervene. When the neo-Nazis, at the announcement of the low sentence for Andrei, the presiding judge did not intervene. So here I'm kind of, I see no need is also an idiom, so I'm kind of adding the using this to add some emphasis. So it means the judge, the judge is kind of a passive guy, or he's actually supporting them because he says, "Ooh, I see nothing. Y'all go ahead, do what you want," right? Yeah, so that's it for now. I've talked a lot. First of all, yeah, I just want to summarize that it's really hard to find an idiomatic expression in the target language, to know when to intervene, when to change the translation strategy, and when to alter the source grammar to come up with a readable target language text. So and this goes far beyond just small grammatical mistakes or wrong word choices in the machine translation output. So yeah, if you have any questions, just leave me a comment, and if you like the video, leave me a thumbs up, and thanks for watching.